and welcome to Snow Cones, Tentacles and Elephants Part 6. As it has been, our lead text for this series is Revelation 17, verses 3 through 5. Verse 3 says, "So he carried me away in the spirit into the wilderness, and I saw a woman sit upon a scarlet-colored beast, full of the names of blasphemy, having 7 heads and 10 horns. And the woman was arrayed in purple and scarlet color, and decked with gold and precious stones and pearls, having a cup in her hand full of abominations and filthiness of her fornication. And upon her forehead was a name written, Mystery, Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots and the abominations of the earth." And that is essentially what we're going to be discovering a little bit today, is how exactly you have abominations that cover the entire earth. How is it that you bring about this diabolical plan to have this particular agency, this mystery Babylon, ruling the entire world? And we will discover that it doesn't matter how you phrase it. Some people will say confusion plus confusion equals fusion, or thesis plus antithesis equals synthesis, or problem plus reaction equals solution. Sometimes you don't even really need a problem. You can have a no problem reaction and then offer the solution. No matter how you slice it, all of these interpretations really are order out of chaos, ordo ab chao, which is to say that you have to get rid of the old to bring about the new. And that is exactly what these organizations, what the Mystery Babylon is all about. When we look at what the great work of the ages is, which is the reconstruction of the Tower of Babel, that is bringing humanity into one cohesive whole. That project, that Tower of Babel, is still being constructed in some way and shape today, and it is to encompass the whole globe. And what was the purpose of that? That purpose was to create a government that would rival the very government of God in heaven here on earth. This is a satanic reconstruction of a governmental system that would essentially rival heaven, right? That was what Satan had in his heart, was to be higher than the Most High, to receive the worship and the adoration of creation, even though he was a created being. But the idea is that you bring this about by creating a system in which people's mindsets can be herded to adopt whatever the philosophy and the practices of the New World Order, because of showing the holes and the ailments of the old order. If you look at the cover of the European Union, they have the depiction of the building of the Tower of Babel. And the stars that they have in the sky are pentagrams. So again, we have this throwback to these symbols, these satanic symbols, these Masonic symbols, letting you know really who is in charge and for whose glory this construction is really all about. When we look in Daniel chapter 11, we have this counterplay between the king of the north and the king of the south. And it's interesting to note that despite the antagonism between these two, there are some very key verses that kind of open our understanding as to what this system is all about, this counterplay between the king of the north and the king of the south, and what it is designed to do. In verse 15 of Daniel chapter 11, we read, "So the king of the north," again denoting that there's a king in the north, "and he shall come." So this is basically an attack. He is going to impose himself, "and cast up a mount, and take the most fenced cities. And the arms of the south shall not withstand, neither his chosen people, neither shall there be any strength to withstand." So this king of the north is going to come with imposing power that the king of the south cannot resist. If we skip ahead a little bit to Daniel 11, chapter 11, verse 23, it says, "And after the league made with him, he shall work deceitfully. For he shall come up and shall become strong with a small people." So this kind of of shows you how exactly this is going about, this league that is being created. And he's going to work deceitfully. So what he's telling the people that are part of this league is one thing, but what his agenda is something else. Verse 27 says, and both these kings' hearts shall be to do mischief, and they shall speak lies at one table. See, they're not just telling lies to each other, but they're also telling lies to those that they're influencing. And the verse continues to say, but it shall not prosper, for yet the end shall be at the time appointed. So even though this Hegelian dialectic, this Ordo ab Chao, is the machination in which Satan is using to bring about the design and the construct of his Luciferian order, it's not going to stand. And how do we know that? Because we see that in the dream that Nebuchadnezzar had, that there was a stone carved out without hands, so that's not with the power of man, that comes and smashes the statue, and it becomes dust and is blown away. And then that rock that was carved out not by human hands becomes the global power of the earth. And so what is that? That's the second coming of Jesus Christ. If we look into the book Morals and Dogma by Albert Pike, we see an interesting symbol on the cover of the book. We have the double-headed eagle. And if we look at that symbol, above the double-headed eagle is a crown and a cross, and above that is a triangle with the number 33 and rays of light coming out from that triangle. Down below the bird, it says Ordo ab Chao. And of course, this is the mantra of the Masonic order. Ordo ab Chao is exactly the plan that is to be used to get people out of their comfort zones, to get them to even think and do things that normally wouldn't be possible especially in peacetime. It's very actually hard to get people to go to war unless you give them a really, really, really good reason and kind of push for that to happen. We see that especially when we recount what happened in World War I. And World War I was an interesting event. It was, again, herding people into a mindset of conflict and then trying to get them to think about, well, how can we have a resolution of this conflict that will bring about an era of perpetual peace? And of course, the thought then was the League of Nations. And if we look at the symbol for the League of Nations, it is a circle with a pentagon, and inside the pentagon are two pentagrams. People call them stars. They're actually pentagrams. And so we have an idea here of who is going to be in charge of this League of Nations. Now, League of Nations didn't really take off the way folks had hoped, and so, well, why not try it again? And so we have shortly after that, another world war, World War II. And the conclusion of that war brings about what is known as the United Nations, to bring peace to the world so that we can negotiate versus having conflicts. But if we look at it historically, we've had nothing but conflict since the end of World War II. It's interesting to note that if we look at the picture down on the bottom left of your screen, we have Winston Churchill, we have Franklin Delano Roosevelt, and we have Joseph Stalin. And it's an interesting group of men here. This formed the Ally powers, and of course they were against the Axis powers, and of course that was headed by Hitler, and then also partnered with Japan and Mussolini in Italy. And so you had apparently these two opposing sides. If we look at the history of Franklin Delano Roosevelt, we see that he is a Freemason. As a matter of fact, there's allegedly photographs of him in his Masonic regalia inside the White House, but here we have a picture of him with some of his lodge brothers. And of course, he's wearing his apron. And if we look into the history of Winston Churchill, we see that he was also a Brother Mason, as we see here, sponsored by the Masonic Stamp Club of New York. We also have these curious pictures of Joseph Stalin with the hidden hand. And what does the hidden hand denote? If we look into the definition, it says it is the sign of the master of the second veil. The hidden hand is found in the rituals of the Royal Arch degree of Freemasonry and communicates Masonic membership to other initiates. So what do we have here? It just so happens to be that FDR, Winston Churchill, and Joseph Stalin were all members of this organization. And who else would be a member of this organization? As we see here, a picture of Jorge Bergoglio, also known as Pope Francis, doing the very same symbol. So who's really in charge? It's also interesting to note that in Germany, many Freemasons were sent to concentration camps and killed by Hitler. And so they have the forget-me-not flower incorporated into their square and compass on a little pin that they wear on their lapels in remembrance of what Hitler had done. Now, Hitler was also a member of an order. And of course, he was a member of the Nazi Reich, which was supported heavily by the Catholic Church. We see some photographs here of Hitler meeting with various popes and cardinals, and the respect that is given, tremendous respect that is given from the Catholic Church to this particular organization. But who's in charge of the Masons? That's right, they all answer to the same central point. So whether you are an Axis power or you an allied power, you are brethren of the same group. We read, "For today Rome considers the fascist regime the nearest to its dogmas and interest. We have not merely the Reverend Jesuit Father Coughlin praising Mussolini's Italy as a Christian democracy. In Civiltà Cattolica, house organ of the Jesuits, says, quite frankly, fascism is the regime that corresponds most closely to the concepts of the Church of Rome." What an interesting admission that is. And we see that because look at this tremendous conflict that has transpired to bring the United States away from its form of government, which is a Republican and Protestant form of government, to a fascist, communist, fully controlled government top-down, top-down government control of every facet of human life, including manufacturing and production. And of course, that is fascist. Fascism is defined by the government and corporation working to the same ends, and that government and corporation are in bed together. Well, that just absolutely overrules and the rights and the privileges of being a United States citizen if you are going to have a dictatorial control by business and government from the top down. That's completely opposite of what our Constitution holds. We continue to look at what has happened historically with these conflicts as we look at the Kennedy and Castro regime. Here we have a war that was basically instigated by the CIA and the FBI, then handed to President Kennedy, assuming that he would do the right thing, quote unquote, the right thing, by allowing air support and U.S. troops to go into Cuba and start an armed conflict with Cuba. Now, this is a small tropical island 90 miles off the coast of Florida, and it was a obvious legitimate threat if it were to become communist. But you see, Kennedy was not interested in conflict. He was interested in conflict resolution. But this machination, this machine, had already set up the idea that we would, as the United States, enter into a conflict, a proxy conflict with Russia via a small tropical country. But President Kennedy was absolutely opposed to that, and it cost him his life. We read this quote, "The very word secrecy is repugnant in a free and open society, and we are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret societies, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings." Now, It's interesting to note that when Kennedy was assassinated here at Dealey Plaza itself is essentially an open-air temple to the sun. And if we get a little bit closer, if we get down to the street view, we'll notice that there is an interesting feature here. There is an obelisk here that is close to the book depository building there in the background. And we'll have to see what this obelisk denotes. This is placed here signifying the birthplace of Dallas, Dealey Plaza. Within this small park was built the first home, which also served as the first courthouse and post office, the first store, and the first fraternal lodge, dedicated to the pioneers of civic progress by order of the park board. So this is denoting that this is a Masonic plaza where Kennedy was assassinated. And he was assassinated, if you look back at the plaza and the shape of the plaza is shaped in a rudimentary pyramid. And you can see here that over on the left-hand side of the picture is the book depository building. You can see a parking lot there with some trees, and right about where you see some part of the half-moon shape of the white promenade there is the grassy knoll. Now, if you zoom into the street view of Dealey Plaza, you'll see a white X on the ground. That is where Kennedy's, the fatal shot that Kennedy received, that is where he was murdered. And so they have denoted that by putting a white X right where where he received that fatal wound. And of course you see the book depository building there in the background. It is a heavy price to pay if you are going to stand against the machination of this Ordo ab Chao. And that's exactly what he did. He had intentionally essentially ended the Vietnam conflict, the United States participating in the Vietnam conflict, and he had reversed many of the policies that had to do with the CIA and the FBI. He was going to splinter them into 1,000 pieces and bring everything under the control of the United States military. Because why? Well, the military answers to the president, so essentially it would make it a civilian represented agency instead of being its own entity. And of course that's talking about the CIA and the FBI. They were basically running the show, and Kennedy knew that, and he was desperate to try and undo what was going on and where they were going to take us. But of course, that's not what happened. After the death of President Kennedy, we have Lyndon Johnson. And of course, here we have again a proxy war in a small tropical country with Russia. Under Lyndon Johnson, the Vietnam War saw a massive escalation of intensity, with 5,000 helicopters being destroyed, millions of tons of bombs being dropped on this country, on these people. 2 million Asians lost their lives, and 58,000 American troops died in that conflict, of which there was no resolution. Now we look at this Ordo ab Chao. It doesn't always have to do with war. Well, it seems to have to do with all the facets of our lives, but it does help to bring about a mindset, and it creates fear and terror. The idea behind these things is, even if the reasoning behind the conflict is false, the conflict itself is real. There are real guns, real bombs, real people dying, and real fear of people losing their lives. So that, and because that is such a real and present danger, people want to see their government provide safety and security for the people, which is the role of government. But what if that role gets twisted, and so that when the government offers a solution for safety and security, what it's actually offering is another chipping away at our society and our Protestant and Republican form of government? We see in the World Trade Center bombing in 1993, there was this setting up of the mindset of terrorism, that we were going to be attacked. We read in this article from February 26, 1993, from the History Channel. It says the World Trade Center is bombed. At 12:18 p.m., a terrorist bomb explodes in a parking garage of the World Trade Center in New York City, leaving a crater 60 feet wide, causing the collapse of several steel-reinforced concrete floors in the vicinity of the blast. Although the terrorist bomb failed to critically damage the main structure of the skyscrapers, 6 people were killed and more than 1,000 were injured. The World Trade Center itself suffered more than $500 million in damage. After the attack, authorities evacuated 50,000 people from the building, hundreds of whom were suffering from smoke inhalation. The evacuation lasted the whole afternoon. And so here is this very real, very palpable sense that we are vulnerable to terrorist attack. Fast forward to the World Trade Center attack of September 11th, 2001, and our fears were most certainly realized, and the sense of vulnerability to terrorist attack at any moment, raising the fear level of the general population and feeling of threat amongst the people was absolutely at its highest after September 11th, 2001. Interesting to note, in Testimonies to the Church, Volume 9, there's a chapter entitled The Last Crisis, starting on page 13. As a matter of fact, the actual chapter starts on page 11. So you have Volume 9, page 11, and we read this account. On one occasion, when in New York City, I was in the night season, called upon to behold buildings rising story after story toward heaven. These buildings were warranted to be fireproof, and they were erected to glorify their owners and builders. Higher and still higher these buildings rose, and in them the most costly material was used. Those to whom these buildings belonged were not asking themselves, how can we best glorify God? The Lord was not in their thoughts. I thought, oh, that those who are thus investing their means could see their course as God sees it. They are piling up magnificent buildings, but how foolish in the sight of the ruler of the universe is their planning and devising. They are not studying with all the powers of heart and mind how they may glorify God. They have lost sight of this, the first duty of man. As these lofty buildings went up, the owners rejoiced with ambitious pride that they had money to use in gratifying self and provoking the envy of their neighbors. Much of the money that they had thus invested had been obtained through exaction, through grinding down the poor. They forgot that in heaven an account of every business transaction is kept, every unjust deal, every fraudulent act is there recorded. The time is coming when in their fraud and insolence men will reach a point that the Lord will not permit them to pass, and they will learn that there is a limit to the forbearance of Jehovah. The scene that next passed before me was an alarm of fire. Men looked at the lofty and supposedly fireproof buildings and said, they are perfectly safe. But these buildings were consumed as if made of pitch. The fire engines could do nothing to stay the destruction. The firemen were unable to operate the engines. How many entire fire crews, were lost in the collapse of those buildings trying to save people from that devastation and that horrible fire? We see also this Hegelian dialectic being played out in Desert Storm, the invasion of Iraq during 1990 and 1991. We read here in Wikipedia, the Gulf War was a war waged by coalition forces from 35 nations led by the United States against Iraq in response to Iraq's invasion and annexation of Kuwait, arising from oil pricing and production disputes. It was codenamed Operation Desert Shield, for operations leading to the buildup of troops and defense of Saudi Arabia, and Operation Desert Storm in its combat phase. And so this is when the United States entered in with full-fledged force into the Middle East. We read here during George Bush Sr.'s administration, of course this was under his watch when we went to war with Iraq, and what did he say? The other 9/11, George Herbert Walker Bush's 1990 New World Order speech. Out of these troubled times, a new world order can emerge. Now remember, this is a bonesman telling you this. He may be wearing the garb of a president, but he is a bonesman. And what did he say? We stand today at a unique and extraordinary moment. The crisis in the Persian Gulf, as grave as it is, also offers a rare opportunity to move toward an historic period of cooperation. Out of these troubled times, our fifth objective, a new world order, can emerge. A new era, freer from the threat of terror, stronger in the pursuit of justice, and more secure in the quest for peace. Well, you see, if we're scared of terror, it's only because terrorists were allowed to do these things that they were able to do. Now, remember, almost all these terrorists were on a terrorist watch list before this transpired. Is it possible, then, that this was conducted by the terrorists, or was this, if ignorance was allowed to prevail, was this allowed to transpire to bring about a need to bring about a new world order? An era in which the nations of the world, east, west, north, and south, can prosper and live in harmony. 100 generations have searched for this elusive path to peace, while 1,000 wars raged across the span of human endeavor. Today, that new world is struggling to be born, a world quite different from the one we've known. A world where the rule of law supplants the rule of the jungle. A world in which nations recognize the shared responsibility for freedom and justice. A world where the strong respect the rights of the weak. If only that were true. The test we face is great, and so are the stakes. This is the first assault on the new world order that we seek, the first test of our mettle. Had we not responded to this first provocation with clarity of purpose, if we do not continue to demonstrate our determination, it would be a signal to actual and potential despots around the world. America and the world must support the rule of law, and we will. America and the world must stand up to aggression, and we will. And one thing more, in the pursuit of these goals, America will not be intimidated. Again, this is a bonesman. This is a man who regularly participated in the cremation of cares at the Bohemian Club, which is, of course, where you go after you graduate from Yale. This is also the place and the heritage that he gave and legacy that he gave to his son. His son wrote a book called, which is his autobiography, George W. Bush, A Charge to Keep. And he mentions in his book, this is a commentary on the book, and it says, in the 2004 U.S. presidential election, both the Democrat and Republican nominees were alumni. George W. Bush wrote in his autobiography, in my senior year, I joined Skull and Bones, a secret society, so secret I can't say anything more. When asked what it meant, that he and Bush were both bonesmen, former presidential candidate John Kerry said, not much, because it's a secret. What was that Kennedy said? That we are opposed to secrecy and to secret oaths? But what has come about since the death of Kennedy? That's right, we have seen more and more of this machination of the playing of left and right and north and south, bringing humanity into this collective that is also regarded as the great work of the ages, also known as the New World Order, brought about by Ordo ab Chao. The Iraq War that we see ourselves in during the second Bush administration is called Iraqi freedom. The Iraq War was a protracted armed conflict that began in 2003 with the invasion of Iraq by a United States-led coalition that overthrew the government of Saddam Hussein. The conflict continued for much of the next decade as an insurgency emerged to oppose the occupying forces and the post-invasion Iraqi government. So people didn't like you just coming into their country and destroying everything. But we'll call that an insurgency. An estimated 151,000 to 1 million Iraqis were killed in the first 3 to 4 years of the conflict. Well, no wonder they were trying to defend themselves from the United States forces. U.S. troops were officially withdrawn in 2011. However, following the spread of the Syrian civil war and the territorial gains of the Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant, the ISIL, The Obama administration decided to redeploy U.S. forces to Iraq in 2014. Many former soldiers were employed by defense contractors and private military companies. The U.S. became re-involved in 2014 at the head of a new coalition. The insurgency and many dimensions of the armed conflict continue. The invasion occurred as part of the George W. Bush administration's War on Terror following the September 11 attacks. That's right, War on Terror, a nebulous enemy somewhere, some that might come up and get you. But when we look at the influence of what the Project for the New American Century was all about in the Bush administration, it might paint a little bit of a different story. If we look inside this white paper put forth by the Project for the New American Century, if we look at page 51, in their first paragraph, it says, further, the process of transformation, this is talking about giving more money to the military-industrial complex, which Eisenhower warned about. The process of transformation, even if it brings about revolutionary change, is likely to be a long one, absent some catastrophic and catalyzing event like a new Pearl Harbor. When did this document come out? This document came out in September of 2000. And when did we get our new Pearl Harbor? September of 2001. And what did Bush say? It was our Pearl Harbor. When we look at what Wikipedia has to say on the Project for the New American Century, if we look at where this red arrow, it says, where this red arrow is, it says, of the 25 people who signed PNAC's founding statement of principles, 10 went on to serve in the administration of the U.S. President George W. Bush, including Dick Cheney, Donald Rumsfeld, Paul Wolfowitz. Were those small players? Those were major players, including the vice president. Observers such as Erwin Setzler and Dave Groden have suggested that the PNAC played a key role in shaping the foreign policy of the Bush administration, particularly in building support for the Iraq War. So when we look at one of the members, one of the prominent members of this PNAC, Dick Cheney, who is the vice president of the United States, we see that he has an interesting history. If we look down at where the red arrow is here on this particular page, it says he is also one of the most unpopular politicians in the history of the U.S., holding an approval rating of just 13% at the time of leaving office. So what was he really there for? Was it to be popular? I doubt. It looks as though he had perhaps another agenda. And where would he have gotten that from? Well, if we continue on, it says between 1987 and 1989, during his last term in Congress, Cheney was a director of the Council of Foreign Relations Foreign Policy Organization. Is that a conflict of interest? To be in Congress and the director of the Council of Foreign Relations at the same time? Very interesting. With the new Democratic administration under President Bill Clinton in January 1993, Cheney left the Department of Defense and joined the American Enterprise Institute. He also served a second term as a Council of Foreign Relations director from 1993 to 1995. From 1995 until 2000, he served as chairman of the board and chief executive officer of Halliburton, a Fortune 500 company. And of course, if you remember Halliburton, they received the contract to maintain and rebuild the oil fields in Iraq. Amazing coincidences that we have here. So what's the role of the Council of Foreign Relations? The Council of Foreign Relations, founded in 1921, is a United States nonprofit think tank. See, if we get away from the term secret society, you can just replace it with think tank. A think tank specializing in the U.S. foreign policy and international affairs. It is headquartered in New York City with an additional office in Washington, D.C. Its membership, which numbers 5,103, has included senior politicians and more than a dozen secretaries of state, CIA directors, bankers, lawyers, professors, and senior media figures. Well, if I didn't know any better, I'd think that was a Tower of Babel. Council of Foreign Relations meetings convene government officials, global business leaders, and prominent members of the intelligence and foreign policy community to discuss international issues. CFR has published the bi-monthly journal Foreign Affairs since 1922 and runs the David Rockefeller Studies Program, which influences foreign policy by making recommendations to the presidential administration and diplomatic community, testifying before Congress, interacting with the media, and publishing on foreign policy issues. So who is actually part of our foreign policy? This think tank? This think tank of unelected officials is directly involved in our foreign policy? Scary. So let's just look and see on the Council on Foreign Relations, just to make sure. Let's go to their website and make sure that we are accurate when we're noting that Richard Cheney was the director there twice. So let's look at their history. If we look at the Council of, the Council on Foreign Relations, if we look at their historical roster of directors and officers, if we look at the time period which was denoted in that article, 1987 and 89 and 1993 to 1995, sure enough, Richard Cheney is listed there. He is one of few to ever hold that office of the Council on Foreign Relations twice. The Council on Foreign Relations mission statement. Again, now we're talking about a Hegelian dialectic. There is a machination, that there is a playing off of one side against the other to bring about the changes that the satanic organizations would like to see present in society. And so this is one of those think tanks, those secret societies that behind the scenes that manipulates and maneuvers things. The Council on Foreign Relations is an independent, nonpartisan membership organization, think tank, and publisher dedicated to being a resource for its members, government officials, business executives, journalists, educators and students, civic and religious leaders, and other interested citizens in order to help them better understand the world and the foreign policy choices facing the United States and other countries. Wow, this is a major role that this organization plays. Let's just take a look at some of the names that we'll see associated with the Council of Foreign Relations. So, of course, the very first one on the list is Joe Biden. Of course, he is the current president, right? So could there be a conflict of interest with Joe Biden and his relationship to the Council of Foreign Relations? Who knows? Josh Bolton? He was the 22nd White House Chief of Staff under George W. Bush. So there we go. We have another member of this Council on Foreign Relations connection. We have, Sandy Berger. Of course, that's historic. The United Nations National Security Advisor under Bill Clinton. Warren Beatty. He's an actor, isn't he? That's right. Tom Brokaw, how about that? An NBC News journalist. Didn't he host the nightly news? That's right, he did. Zbigniew Brzezinski. He was the 10th United States National Security Advisor under Jimmy Carter and primary organizer of the Trilateral Commission. So that it was another think tank organization, which we're not really going to get into in this particular series, but that's another one for you to look up on your own and look at how these things are all interconnected, going down even further. Erin Burnett. Do you remember her, the CNN anchor? Yep, that's right. George H.W. Bush, of course, he was the 41st president. So like father, like son, here we go. That's another name associated with this group. Frank Carlucci, the 16th Secretary of Defense and 15th U.S. Security Advisor under Ronald Reagan, 13th Deputy Director of the Central Intelligence Agency under Jimmy Carter. Boy, these are a lot of serious people that are a part of this group. And, of course, Jimmy Carter was a part of it. And, of course, Frank Carlucci was under the Carter administration. Bill Clinton. How about Hillary Clinton? How about George Clooney? How about Katie Couric, former CBS and NBC journalist and talk show host? That's right. How about Mario Cuomo? He was wasn't he the mayor of New York? What about Jeffrey Epstein? Is that name familiar? That's right. You could go to the Council on Foreign Relations and hobnob with all these interesting folks. How about Gerald Ford? How about Geraldine Ferraro, former Democratic New York congressman, first woman on a major party presidential ticket in 1984? How about Ruth Bader Ginsburg, Supreme Court justice? Is there a conflict of interest there? How about Mikhail Gorbachev? Wait a minute, I thought we were at war with these people. No? Okay. Peter Goss, former Republican congressman of Florida, 19th director of the Central Intelligence Agency under George W. Bush. Boy, this is just a collection and cast of characters. How about Newt Gingrich? That's right. That's right. And how many of these people are propped up to be heroes, American heroes, when at the time when they were either serving or after, there was so much scandal with their service or the administrations that they were a part of, and yet they're heralded as heroes. How about Robert Kagan, historian and co-founder for the project of the New American Century? Well, there you go. How about John Kerry, Bonesman? That's right. And his daughter? How about that? Vanessa Kerry? How about Henry Kissinger? Major player in the Bohemian Grove, a major insider right there. Henry Kissinger. How about Paul Wolfowitz? 10th president of the World Bank and former U.S. Deputy Secretary of Defense under George W. Bush. That's right. And he was also a member of what? That's right, PNAC, that got us into the Iraq War. How about James Woolsey, 16th director of the Central Intelligence Agency under Bill Clinton? I thought we were left and right were against each other. Well, not in this group. Paula Zahn, journalist, former anchor in Fox News and CNN. Just to name a few. How about Rupert Murdoch? Founder and chairman, CEO of News Corp and Fox News. How many people rely on the truth from Fox News? My goodness. Janet Napolitano, third United States Secretary of Homeland Security under Obama. That's another one. So you even have the FEMA directors and Homeland Security, all part of this Council on Foreign Relations. How about Sandra Day O'Connor, former United States Supreme Court Justice? There's another one there. How about Henry Paulson, 74th United States Treasury Secretary under George W. Bush? Boy, they're all members of this group. How about Colin Powell? Colin Powell, under the George H.W. Bush administration. There he is. How about Priscilla Presley? Would you think of that? Would you think of that name to be there? But there she is. How about Charles Prince, former chief executive of Citigroup? There's your banking connection. How about Janet Reno? How many of you remember Janet Reno and Bill Clinton destroying a bunch of former Seventh-day Adventists in a little town called Waco and burning them to the ground? That's exactly right. You can go hobnob with them in the Council on Foreign Relations. How about Condoleezza Rice? That's right, Secretary of State under George W. Bush. How about Dan Rather? That's right, journalist, former anchor of CBS. That's right. Let's see. How about David Rockefeller? Of course, the Rockefellers are going to be involved in this. They're probably the ones who are actually creating the policy and steering the ship that is called the Council on Foreign Relations. How about Charlie Rose? Do you remember the sexual allegations that came up about Charlie Rose? He used to be a PBS journalist and interviewer. He had a very interesting show. He would interview all kinds of people. But again, here's that media connection there. And of course, PBS, public broadcasting. Not so much public when you're funded by all these corporations. George Soros, absolutely. Currency speculator, investor, and businessman, one of the most powerful men in the world. How about Leslie Stahl, CBS News journalist? That's right. How about going down to George Stephanopoulos? Isn't he in the media now? Well, most certainly, because it's all connected. Especially when he used to be a former White House press secretary under Bill Clinton, and now then he was a Good Morning America anchor, and this week with George Stephanopoulos. So you go from politics to media. It's not a big jump, especially when you look at this cast of characters that are a part of the Council on Foreign Relations. Again, this is just one think tank. And this is not including the Trilateral Commission. But look at these names. Look at the influence that these people have. How about Barbara Walters? Was she influential in her day? Absolutely she was. How about Robert McNamara, 8th Secretary of Defense under the President John F. Kennedy and Lyndon Johnson, and 5th President of the World Bank? Is there a problem here? Oh my goodness. When you do what you're supposed to be doing, you get promoted to the head of the World Bank, and it happens over and over and over again. How about Richard Nixon? That's also a member of the Bohemia Club, sitting across the way from Ronald Reagan. How about David Rockefeller? That's right. And how about Nelson Rockefeller? And how about John D. Rockefeller? That's right. All names that are very familiar, heavily influential, and heavy into bringing about a new world order. And so what came about as a result of these wars and conflicts, especially having to do with Iraq during the Bush administrations? Well, we brought about this. the Homeland Security Advisory System. I don't know if you remember this, but they would lower and raise the threat level continuously. And so it kept all of us on our toes, thinking that there was going to be an imminent terrorist attack. And because of that fear, it led to a piece of legislation known as the Patriot Act. That's right. The U.S. Patriot Act, commonly known as the Patriot Act, is an act of the United States Congress that was signed into law by U.S. President George W. Bush on October 26, 2001. U.S. Patriot is a backronym that stands for Uniting Strengthening America by providing accurate tools required to intercept and obstruct terrorism. The Patriot Act was written following the September 11 attacks in an effort to dramatically tighten U.S. national security, particularly as it related to foreign terrorism. And so what did it do? It expanded the abilities of law enforcement to surveil, including tapping domestic and international phones. I want you to think about that. Eased interagency communication to allow federal agencies to more effectively use all available resources in counterterrorism efforts. So that's bringing all of these organizations into one whole. What was it that Kennedy wanted to do with these organizations? He wanted to shatter them into 1,000 pieces. Increased penalties for terrorism crimes and an expanded list of activities which would qualify someone to be charged with terrorism. So this is basically rewriting the definition of terrorism. Very, very interesting. And so you have this counterplay back and forth, where you have one group antagonizing another group, you get the reaction, and then you provide the solution. So what happens? We have this increased terrorism, supposedly since the bombing in 1993 of the World Trade Center, and then of course the Twin Tower attacks in 2001. We have to do something, the people cry. We must have safety. We must be guaranteed some type of civility against these terrorist groups. And so then here comes this legislation, which basically brings the shackles onto just the average Joe American citizen. This counterplay of back and forth, when we saw what happened in 1993, it was a small thing compared to what happened in 2001, which was a large thing. And we see that kind of playing out in our modern day. When we look at what happened during the Trump administration and his government shutdown because he wanted to have funding for his border wall. Do you remember that? Shortly after that, we had a global lockdown. So the government has a shutdown or a lockdown, if you will, because of funding, almost as if they are practicing how they're going to run government during a lockdown situation. But of course, it's not framed that way. And if you look at this picture of President Trump, who are some of the advisors that are standing behind him as this Fox News alert is being prompted on the screen there? We have 1, 2, 3 Catholic priests. The one directly to his left is wearing a cross that is identical to the cross of Pope Francis. Pope Francis, if you remember, is a Jesuit, right? So what kind of influence is this man receiving? That's right. And so what ends up happening? Backing down, Trump agrees to end shutdown without border wall money. President Donald Trump agreed under mounting pressure on Friday to end a 35-day-old partial U.S. government shutdown. That's the part that we need to pay attention to. It was a 35-day trial run for what a lockdown or a shutdown would look like. And so what else do we have leading up to that? Well, we have a trial run, a tabletop simulation of a coronavirus coming out of Wuhan, China, that is going to devastate the globe in October. It's called Event 201. Now remember, the first quote-unquote case of COVID did not get recognized until November. This happened months before that. This is Event 201. It was sponsored by the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health, also the World Economic Forum, and Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And what was this exercise all about? The Event 201 was a 3.5-hour pandemic tabletop exercise that simulated a series of dramatic, scenario-based facilitated discussions confronting difficult, true-to-life dilemmas associated with response to a hypothetical but scientifically plausible pandemic. I want you to understand, this is before COVID. Before COVID hit, just a few months. 15 global businesses, government, and public health leaders were players or actors in the simulation exercise that highlighted unresolved real-world policy and economic issues that would be solved with sufficient political will, financial investment, and attention now and in the future. So this is this catastrophe is going to bring about world policy changes, including economic, social, and political. That's what they're saying. So what ends up happening? We read, it says the exercise consisted of pre-recorded news broadcasts, live staff briefings, and moderated discussions on specific topics. Now, these are all played out. These are all scripted. These issues were carefully designed in a compelling narrative, that educated the participants and the audience. It's very interesting. Let's keep going. So, what was the purpose? In recent years, the world has seen a growing number of epidemic events, amounting to approximately 200 events annually. These events are increasing and they are disruptive to health, economies, and society. Managing these events already strains global capacity, even absent a pandemic threat. Experts agree that it is only a matter of time before one of these epidemics becomes global, a pandemic with potentially catastrophic consequences. A severe pandemic, which becomes Event 201, would require reliable cooperation among several industries, national governments, and key international institutions. I want you to go back and think about the Council on Foreign Relations and what did it house? It housed people from every facet of life: industry, business, media, politics. It had everything, finance. It had everybody in that group. Now, is that a Tower of Babel? Is that bringing together all into one cohesive whole? So is that what this is all about? Is, again, shaping the mindset of the individuals into a cohesive whole for their quote-unquote safety. Look down at the bottom arrow there, and it says the players responded to the scenario illuminated. The players' responses to the scenario illuminated the need for cooperation among industry, national governments, key international institutions, civil society to avoid the catastrophic consequences that could arise from large-scale pandemics. So in order to be safe, we need to make sure we are all on the same page in case there's a pandemic. Remember, this was before COVID. Let's keep reading. Similar to the Center's 3 previous exercises, so they've done this before. They've had simulations like this before. One was Clade X, the other was Dark Winter, and the other one was Atlantic Storm. Okay, how many times when President Biden first got elected did we hear him repeat the phrase Dark Winter, Dark Winter, Dark Winter? Event 201 aimed to educate senior leaders at the highest level of U.S. and international governments and leaders in global industries. See, now look at what they're saying here. International, global. Do you see this? So you have a worldwide coming together and policy that is shaped out of the fear of this pandemic, but it's actually uniting all of these things globally. It's amazing how they were able to do this. People may not have realized what was taking place. Let's continue reading. It says, Event 201 simulates an outbreak of a novel zoonotic coronavirus transmitted from bats to pigs to people that eventually becomes efficiently transmissible from person to person, leading to a severe pandemic. A coronavirus from pigs? Interesting. The pathogen and the disease it causes are modeled largely on SARS, but it is more transmissible in the community setting by people with mild symptoms, the asymptomatic carriers. That's right, people who aren't sick. Got to be terrified of people who are not sick. It's interesting to see that of all the things that were brought up in this document about bringing about a cohesive approach to treat and to combat this event, this fictitious event of a pandemic, you see this particular section. This is section 7 in their Event 201 scenario paper release. Now, this talks about the things that need to be changed and things that need to be brought and implemented in order to help to mitigate the effects of having a pandemic. And so this is one of their key pieces. We need to read this. Governments and the private sector should assign a greater priority to developing methods to combat mis and disinformation prior to the next pandemic response. Very interesting. So who determines what is mis or disinformation? Governments will need to partner with traditional and social media companies to research and develop nimble approaches to countering misinformation. Isn't that what we heard the government was involved in their heavy influencing of YouTube? Didn't they get in trouble with that? Isn't there an ongoing court case right now about the government's involvement pushing YouTube to censor people? Absolutely there is. And look at how it follows this particular mantra of the Event 201 scenario. This will require developing the ability to flood media with fast, accurate, and consistent information. Public health authorities should work with private employers and trusted community leaders such as faith leaders. Did they close our churches? They most certainly did, to promulgate factual, according to them, information to employees and citizens. Trusted, influential private sector employers should create the capacity to readily and reliably augment public messaging, manage rumors and misinformation, and amplify credible information to support emergency public communications. In other words, if you don't follow the narrative that we're putting out, it's automatically deemed disinformation. National public health agencies should work in close collaboration with the World Health Organization. What's the World Health Organization again? It is the product of the United Nations, and the United Nations is based solely on the writings of Alice A. Bailey and Helena Petrovna Blavatsky, who were both Luciferian. So the World Health Organization has no other ability but to be Luciferian in its agenda. But that's who they want in control, to collaborate with the World Health Organization to create the capability to rapidly develop and release consistent health messages. So where are the messages going to be coming from? From a centrally dictated place. That means granular. That means individuals who are interested in finding truth are going to be shut down. You will have only the official narrative. For their part, media companies should commit to ensuring that authoritative messages are prioritized and that false messages are suppressed. That's called censorship, including through the use of technology. Did that happen? Oh, yes, it did. Every single major social media group was all out to censor anyone who is not talking the official line coming from the central. So from this simulation, we see that they actually did put policy in place that models this very mantra. Accomplishing the above goals will require collaboration among governments, international organizations, and global business. If these recommendations are robustly pursued, major progress can be made to diminish the potential impact and consequences of pandemics. Is it the pandemics or what the impositions that are in place on the people because of quote-unquote pandemics? We call on leaders in global business, international organizations, and national governments to launch an ambitious effort to work together to build a world better prepared for a severe pandemic. And then what happened? Just like that. What amazing prophecy these organizations are able to come up with. This is Times Square. Where are the people? That's right, this is the COVID lockdown. This is what it looked like. This is what the Arc de Triomphe, one of the major tourist spots in France, looked like. And of course we have everything is closed because of COVID-19, or takeout only, and all these restrictions, all these impositions that were put into place. Again, and it's so real because it's in your face. People coming to you with masks and fear and all this stuff, and the constant threat that you're going to kill grandma because you're an asymptomatic carrier. You didn't even know you were sick, and she's going to drop dead because you were able to somehow transmit this disease to her. Unbelievable, but that's it. That's what happened, and we had it everywhere. And so, because it was on every commercial, it was in your face everywhere you went. The fear that it generated was more than enough to begin to steer people in a global way. Instead of it being regional, it was a global push for people to accept the mandates and to wear a mask and to social distance. All of this, of course, on questionable circumstances at best from what was transpiring in Wuhan, China. Of course, Arizona, we need to mask up. And then what else ended up happening? What was shown to us in this corona virus COVID-19 pandemic? Well, they want to change the economy. They want to change the economy. And so little signs like this started popping up everywhere. And so what ends up happening? If we're being fed our information by the media, which is what they're saying should have transpired, then that's exactly what's happening. That little box in the room is telling you everything you need to know. But we're going somewhere, and they are all too happy to take you. And this is where we're going. Welcome to 2030. I own nothing, have no privacy, and life has never been better. This is an article written by this woman here, Ida Auken, member of Parliament of Denmark, who is also a member of the World Economic Forum. So again, we see the stair step. We need the fear to get people to release their grip on what is known as private property. If you as a person do not have the right to private property, then you are no longer a person. You are no longer sovereign. If you don't have the right to freedom of speech, it's the same as not being able to think unless it is according to a narrative. Here's how life could change in my city by the year 2030. Now I can hardly believe that we accepted congestion and traffic jams. That's right. Life has never been better. And so this is the future impact that the World Economic Forum wishes to have. And what does Klaus Schwab, the head of the World Economic Forum, what does he have to say? He has some very interesting things to say. He says a new world could emerge, the contours of which it is incumbent on us to reimagine and to redraw. Does that sound like our friend, the Bonesman, Herbert Walker Bush, George Herbert Walker Bush? It's almost verbatim what he said. The pandemic represents a rare but narrow window of opportunity. That's right. That's what the Iraq War was also, wasn't it? Didn't he say the same word? An opportunity. That's right. To reflect, reimagine, and reset our world. He also makes an interesting statement. He says the future is not something that just happens. The future is built by us, by a powerful community as you here in this room. Now, I doubt that anyone listening to this has ever been invited to be in that room when he's making the statements on how they are going to reshape the world. That means you and I have been left out. Biography: Klaus Schwab was born in Ravensburg, Germany in 1938. He is founder and executive chairman of the World Economic Forum, the international organization for public-private cooperation. What's public and private cooperation? Fascism. By the very definition, it is fascism. Fascism is a far-right, authoritarian, ultra-nationalist political ideology and movement characterized by a dictatorial leader, centralized autocracy, militarism, forcible suppression of opposition. Isn't that what we see the underpinnings when they're bringing about all this social media censorship of people going against the official narrative of this COVID-19? That's right. Suppression of opposition, belief in a natural social hierarchy, subordination of individual interests for the perceived good of the nation and race. That's right. You're just a cog in the wheel. You have no privacy and no freedom, and a strong regimentation of society and the economy. Everything becomes militaristic in its form and function. Fascist economics supported a state-controlled economy that accepted a mix of private and public ownership over the means of production. Economic planning was applied to both the public and private sector, and the prosperity of the private enterprise depended on its acceptance of synchronizing itself with the economic goals of the state. So think about it. If you want to become an entrepreneur, you have a great idea for a product? Yeah, right. You better make sure it's in line with the state. Fascist economic ideology supported the profit motive. That's right. But emphasized that industries must uphold the nationalist interest as superior to private profit. That's right. Everything under centralized control. The Pope and Mussolini. The Secret History of Pope Pius XI and the Rise of Fascism in Europe. This is a book put out by David Kurtzer, and he says the Pope would in fact say that the one true totalitarian organization is not the fascist state or the fascist party, it's the Roman Catholic Church. Whose policies are we seeing in Event 201? Whose policies are we seeing in the World Economic Forum? That's right, the woman riding the scarlet-colored beast. Here it is. Here it is. That's what it's all about, the Great Reset. There is an urgent need for global stakeholders to cooperate in simultaneously managing the direct consequences of the COVID-19 crisis. That's right. Never let a good crisis go to waste. Never let a good crisis go to waste. That's exactly what this is all about. To improve the state of the World Economic Forum is starting the Great Reset Initiative. That's right. We need to remake things in our image, right? Let's see, if we look at the bottom of this particular side, it says, where it says the opportunity. Again, there's that word, right? As we enter a unique window of opportunity to shape the recovery, this initiative will offer insights to help inform all those determining the future state of global relations, the direction of national economies, the priorities of societies, the nature of business models, and the management of global commons. This is the Tower of Babel. This is a absolute throwing away of everything that we have known up to this point in favor of a new world order. Now is the time for the Great Reset, says the World Economic Forum. In every crisis, there is opportunity. That's right. So what are the facets that this Great Reset is looking to encompass? It's looking to encompass every facet of your life, and it already does. It already does. Look at what these. Look at some of these. The terms that are in this circle. It says shaping the economic recovery, redesigning social contracts, skills, and jobs. That's right. So whatever future you've been going to school for won't exist anyway. Restoring the health of the environment, developing sustainable business models, revitalizing global cooperation. There it is. There's the New World Order right there. Strengthening regional development, harnessing the Fourth Industrial Revolution. And then you look at what those things encompass. That encompasses everything. It encompasses the LGBT. It includes 5G, your digital identity, blockchain. Everything is included in this. Sustainable development, the Sustainable Development Goals of Agenda 21. That's right. It's all part of this. So this is the mapping. This is the mapping of how they want to bring about this new Roman system. We see in the World Government Summit. How many of you knew that this took place? That's right. There was a World Government Summit in Dubai in 2023. And Dr. Pippa Malmgren, Avonhurst senior advisor, comments, a new world order is forming, not by design, but by default. So even if you don't want this thing to come, the way they have constructed things, as it stands right now, everything will collapse anyway. So you have to have a new world order. And we can feel it. It's palpable. Pressures in markets and geopolitics are combining to create a new landscape for individual citizens and corporate citizens alike. The old world order was analog. The new world order will be digital. That means contracts, money, and governance will all be digital too. The financial system in the industrialized world was already broken when the recent wars broke out, trade wars, the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and the war on the COVID virus. The solutions require a new set of rules coming from the World Government Summit. Do you see it coming? Do you see the Tower of Babel being built? When she talks about a digital governance, it includes this key piece. This is central bank digital currency, also known as CBDC. A central bank digital currency, also called digital fiat currency or digital base money, is a digital currency issued by a central bank rather than by a commercial bank. It is also a liability of the central bank and denominated in the sovereign currency, as in the case with physical banknotes and coins. Rather than a new currency, CBDC is a form of central bank electronic money that would be used by households and businesses to make payments. A report by the Bank of International Settlements states that although the term central bank digital currency is not well defined, it is envisioned by most to be a new form of central bank money that is different from balances in traditional reserve or settlement accounts. What does that mean? That the government itself will issue the money, that there will be no more company banks. Okay, so that's the centralization of the currency. And what else comes with that? Well, the deputy managing director of the IMF, Bo Lee, sharing how the central bank digital currency, CBDC, would allow the government to precisely control what people can and cannot spend with their own money. And this is what he says in the IMF seminar, CBDCs for Financial Inclusion, Risks, Rewards, October 14, 2022. And this is what he said. The third way we think CBDC can improve financial inclusion, so that means bringing everybody from every walk of life all over the world into this system, is through what we call programmability. That is, CBDC can allow government agencies, listen to this, and private sector players to program to create small contract to allow targeted policy functions. For example, welfare payments, for example, consumption coupon, for example, food stamp. By programming CBDC, those money can be precisely targeted for what kind of people can own and what kind of use this money can be utilized, for example, for food. So this potential programmability can help government agencies to precisely target their support to those people who need support so they can also improve financial inclusion. What does that mean? They can shut your money off. They can make it so that your money is good in one business and not good in another business. They can say that the money in your bank account will only last for a certain period of time and you have to pay. That means your bank account, your money, your everything is fully controlled from a central governmental agency. Think about that. Think about that. Now, that's not the same as the United States Treasury. This is something completely different. This is not based on a gold standard. Remember, it's a fiat money. It's a fiat money, just like the Roman Empire had fiat money. And what happened to the Roman Empire's economy? It went belly up because it was on a fiat economy. That's right. Revelation 13, 16 and 17 says, "And he causeth all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and bond, to receive a mark in their right hand or in their foreheads." That's the inclusion that we just read about. Inclusion. Everyone is included. "And no man might buy or sell, save he that had the mark or the name of the beast or the number of his name." Now we see that this is a spiritual it's talking about the spiritual aspect, but the spiritual aspect always has a physical play out level. There has to be a way for them to monitor who's buying or selling, and this is where we are going. Testimonies to the Church, Volume 9, page 11, "The Last Crisis Again." We'll quote from this again. "We are living in the time of the end. The fast-fulfilling signs of the times declare that the coming of Christ is near at hand. The days in which we live are solemn and important. The Spirit of God is gradually but surely being withdrawn from the earth. Plagues and judgments are already falling upon the despisers of the grace of God. The calamities by land and sea, the unsettled state of society, the alarms of war are portentous. They forecast approaching events of the greatest magnitude." Are we seeing it play out now? Are these words being fulfilled in our hearing? The agencies of evil are combining their forces and consolidating. They are strengthening for the last great crisis. Great changes are soon to take place in our world, and the final movements will be rapid ones. Are we seeing that? Are they saying that they want to see great changes take place in our world? They most certainly will, and they must move rapidly. In a view given June 27, 1850, my accompanying angel said, "Time is almost finished. Do you reflect the lovely image of Jesus as you should?" Then I was pointed to the earth, and I saw that there would have to be a getting ready among those who have of late embraced the third angel's message. Said the angel, "Get ready, get ready, get ready. Ye will have to die a greater death to the world than ye have yet died. I saw that there was a great work to do for them, but little time in which to do it." This is so important. We must awake to what is happening in this world. We have seen pandemics and epidemics before, but we have never seen global control come out of a pandemic like this. Global control. All aspects of society. That's what we saw the World Economic Forum is interested in taking control of. So we have to make a choice. We have to make a choice. You see, the herd, the mindset is going in one direction. It is being pushed in that direction because of what terrifies us. But we have to be prepared. We have to be willing to stand as individuals. Individuals that say no. We say no. We want to be on the side of Christ. And that will be the most important thing. As we see these changes taking place, as we see them putting agony on people to force them into going along with this system, we must be convicted in ourselves that we would rather die than violate the law of God. Daniel 11, verses 40 through chapter 12, verse 3, and it says, "And at the time of the end shall the king of the south push at him, and the king of the north shall come against him like a whirlwind, with chariots, and with horsemen, and with many ships, and he shall enter into the countries, and he shall overflow and pass over." This system will be global. "He shall enter also into the glorious land, and many countries shall be overthrown, but these shall escape out of his hand, even Edom and Moab and the chief of the children of Ammon. He shall stretch forth his hand also upon the countries, and the land of Egypt shall not escape." This is a global system. So even these atheistic groups will not escape this thing. The Luciferian order is going to come about. "But he shall have power over the treasure of gold and of silver." Many people put their faith into buying gold and silver. But listen, when he declares that the ownership of gold and silver is forbidden because of his right to ownership over gold and silver, what good is it going to do you? "And over all the precious things of Egypt, and the Libyans and the Ethiopians shall be at his steps." That means everyone from every walk of life will come into line or be forced to come into line. "But tidings out of the east and out of the north shall trouble him. Therefore he shall go forth with great fury to destroy, like a roaring lion, seeking whom he may devour, and utterly to make away many." So that means he knows that there's trouble coming. So his game plan is to kill as many as possible so that they won't have the opportunity to see the truth. "And he shall plant the tabernacle of his palace between the seas in the glorious holy mountain. Yet he shall come to his end, and none shall help him." That's when that stone comes and destroys the statue. "And at that time shall Michael stand up, the great prince which standeth for the children of thy people, and there shall be a time of trouble such as never was since there was a nation, even to that same time. And at that time thy people shall be delivered, everyone that shall be found written in the book." When Jesus comes back, make no mistake, it is a rescue mission. It is a rescue mission. He's coming to take that which is his. "And many of them that sleep in the dust of the earth shall awake, some to everlasting life, and some to shame and everlasting contempt. And they that be wise shall shine as the brightness of the firmament, and they that turn many to righteousness as the stars forever and ever. This is our opportunity. It is this time that we can begin to open people's eyes to the righteousness and the beauty of the character of Jesus Christ. As we see this turmoil taking place in our world, we have the sure word of prophecy that we can present to people, just like in this series, and show them all these things have been foretold, and the second coming of Jesus Christ is at hand. And my prayer is that each and every one of us would take these words absolutely seriously. Please take the time to share this with other people who would be interested, so that they have the opportunity to take these threads that have been presented and do research for themselves. That's the most important part of this whole series, is that you take what has been presented here and you go look for yourself. The information becomes thousands of times more valuable when you do a little bit of searching for yourself. But that's the end of this particular portion of this particular series of Snow Cones, Tentacles, and Elephants. So let's close now with a word of prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, we are so blessed for this opportunity that we can share these truths that you have so plainly laid out in the writings of the Spirit of prophecy and in your word, all the events of these closing days of Earth's history. Lord, we just ask that you would give us strength and give us wisdom. That you would fill our minds and our hearts, that we may speak a word in season and out of season. And that we would stand boldly for the truth and not go along just to get along, but to do that which is right and to stand for the truth though the heavens fall. Lord, we thank you so much for this opportunity and for living in this particular point in Earth's history. We praise your name and we pray all these things in Jesus' name. Amen.